Hello and welcome to ThePrint Softcover. It's a platform where we launch non-fiction books, and today's book is probably very interesting for women and probably also men who can learn a bit about women, probably in a certain way. So this is the book. It's called How Not to Be a Superwoman by Nilanjana Bhowmick, with whom I'll speak about this very, very interesting book that I just finished in the morning today. And I actually wanted to start with something personal because, we had this interview schedule and, in the morning, you're trying to make breakfast, trying to reach on time and all. And whatever you've written, I think a bit of it came back to me because I used to have a working mother. And I used to feel like, oh, I want to be like her growing up, oh, she manages household, she manages her job, she gets us different. And then somewhere in midway, when I was struggling to do that, and then I would be like, but I'm doing it only for myself and I still can't manage. The first thing that came to my mind was guilt. And then, of course, I started comparing myself to her. And then when I read that particular chapter about guilt, because I wanted to really start from there, I felt like, okay, I have been there and so have been so many women. So let's start with that chapter, which is about guilt that women feel. Sometimes mothers feel a bit more, which and now I realize, sometimes when my mother would talk about, so today was not a good day in terms of not being able to pack a tiffin, or I would return the tiffin and she would take it so personally and I would never understand. So let's talk about guilt. And I want you to actually give the audience an insight about what is this particular guilt and why it's so interesting and particular to women.
I think, women suffer from all kinds of guilt. So it's not just, mother guilt is, of course, the most pervasive of all. But, as a daughter also, you suffer from, not doing enough for your parents, as a wife, you suffer from not doing enough for, like your other half or whatever, but I feel like, guilt is really a symptom of the disease. It is also a symptom of how women are, socialized from a young age to understand that, it's actually, like, let me just walk back a little bit. I think, it's actually about gender roles, right? We all grow up with gender roles and we are socialized to accept that, our if I may use the term USP, is our unique selling point is that, apparently no one can, give care like women can, which is complete BS, absolutely, I mean, it's not rocket science. Anyone can, provide care, provided, they wanted to. So I think the guilt stems from that expectation that, even if you are educated and you are empowered and you have, you're a working woman, or even if you're staying at home, you're a homemaker, even then this guilt that we are not doing enough. And I think, I have spoken about this, a lot. And but I just want to keep repeating this, that, this is because women for so long, and, it is, yes, it is more pervasive in, patriarchal countries, but even in the West, women, suffer from, all of this, imposter syndrome, guilt, the perfection trap, all of this. And it's because, the entire narrative of this world and societies around the world has been set around women's perceived inabilities. So what women can't do, right? So, or what they should do. So this is all being decided, not by women. And even when women are deciding this, it's not an informed decision they're making, because as a child, when your mother, calls you to the kitchen, to lend a hand with her, because, she obviously wants you to be prepared for your future life, where she has also, she understands that, the expectations that that would be there of you. You are a child, right? A young girl, as a young girl, you would have rather played outside than go into that kitchen. So, but you go because, you don't want to anger your mother, and whatever, as children, you really, there's a power imbalance between adults and children. So you go, but then, that becomes the socialization. And from that socialization comes, guilt. And you're always guilty, as a mother, as a journalist, I had quite a hectic job, and I had all sorts of guilt, like guilt of, not being around, for my son, or, for missing, some school meeting or something, or not being, I would see mothers, around me, so active, they were like all on this group and they were discussing these things and that thing. And most of this would come as a surprise to me because I would just like log in after a whole week and I was like completely overwhelmed, and with that feeling of being overwhelmed comes the feeling of guilt. So I think, this guilt is an identifier, of what's wrong with women's lives across the world. But of course, more so, like for patriarchal countries like ours, that why should, you have to, if the world, has half its population, is women and the other half is men, how can a group go along with their lives, without any guilt, and the other half, has like, guilt stacking up over each other, like that should be the question we start with. It means, it is something that's imposed. It is not natural. So that's my take on, all the guilt that we suffer, like daily and yearly and throughout our lives.
Okay. So there's this other bit, which, of course, there's so many bits that I felt like if I was in school and I was behaving like that, good girl in school, I would be underlining so many points. Almost urged to do that. But yes,
you would give me 100 on 100.
Yeah. So yeah,
you would give if you are correcting the paper, you would give me 100 on 100. Thank you.
I would totally. But yeah, let's come back to this whole good girl trap. Something that I also realized while reading this, and again, something that you pointed out, and specifically because this again comes from this very personal experience where we have two daughters, and my sister was the better one in that sense. She knows everything, and this is something I heard not just from my parents, but outsiders too. Doesn't know anything. Like this was consistent, and then you would have this whole thing. Oh, because she's the younger one. All of those, right? And then there was the first pressure always for a woman is to learn how to cook.
Yeah.
Like the helping in the kitchen is seen as such the first, I would say, conscious reminder when you're slightly older of your gender role that the kitchen has to be your. Yeah. And I remember resisting it like heavily. I was accident prone, so my parents were also terrified that she'll burn the house down. But also I resisted. Till a point where my mother sat me down, and that was such an important conversation. She said that I'm not asking you to learn how to cook to get married. I want you to learn so that when you have a job later on, you know how to cook for yourself. You don't have to. It is that change in what she said that eventually. But I also realized like this is also something that could be, taught to women instead of forcing that, you need to be, doing this because somebody else has to be pleased by your cooking skills, as opposed to, wouldn't it be great if you knew how to make XYZ things? Can you not?
Yeah.
Narrative change, I feel, which you again talk about, it's in the, put yourself in first in the to-do list. I don't think it happens even today. And I can look at it from my mother's perspective. It's a different generation, of course.
Yeah.
But even today, if I try to do that a lot, there'll be so much, noise around me that I don't think it'll be easy to have that.
Yeah. I think, there's two things here. First, I feel that when, you're right, when, women are taught to cook and whatever, clean or whatever, training that we get, when we are young. It comes from a place that marriage is be all end all, right? So your parents might be educating you. They might, want you to have a great career, but they are also looking at you to settle down, as we say, right? So, and to, to be considered marriageable, you need to have certain skills, right? So I think that narrative change from marriage worthy skills to life skills, is the narrative that we need to focus on. Like, your mother did with you, right? She changed your perspective about something which is actually a life skill.
Right.
I mean, everybody should know, how to cook. Like, even in today's world, even men, like often are, working, out of their, like hometowns and whatever. And everybody should know, it's an emergency. It's like, learning to swim, or, learning to make an Excel sheet or something, like it is connected to our, to survival. So I think that narrative change, like how your mother handled it, I wish, every parent would handle it that way. But unfortunately, that awareness is still not there. Like, I don't blame parents, like our parents at least, like they grew up with certain set ideas about gender roles that was never challenged. And as I keep saying that, it's just not enough to make, laws. Its laws are very important, of course, to safeguard women's rights. But then alongside, there has to be an awareness about those laws. There has to be a social and cultural norms change. And that is the hardest thing to do. It is hardest to shift narrative, especially, when there is no sustained effort towards it. Could we not have changed the narrative in the last, like, let's not go very far back, okay? Let's just go 10 years back. Couldn't we have, like, changed the narrative in the last 10 years? Yes, we could have. But there has been no sustained effort to do that. Like, I mean, how difficult is it to just, shift the narrative on its head and say that, girls and boys, like children, to learn this life skills. And I feel that, because obviously, societal norms are hard to change. You cannot go to everyone's house and change how they think. I think this role has to be, taken up by schools. But it's not really happened, right? How many schools have, given our struggles with, gender inequalities and everything, you would think that every school in India would have a chapter or a module on gender, right? But I just don't see how else, we can shift the narrative. And there has been not really any efforts. I keep talking about this, that it has to start from schools, because that's where we get all the young minds together, right? But I think, like, that's how we'll be able to change the narrative. If we don't do it, then, I mean, like, we cannot change anything, even in the coming, like 10, 20, 30 years. It has to start, right now, because, I think the younger generation, they're more informed, thanks to, Netflix and all of this, like, global shows. They are, they watch it. And, equality, when you see it, is a very attractive thing. And I see that, because I see, like for example, my son, when he watches Netflix shows and when we are discussing them, I see that he's really, taken with this concept of equality. Like, because it's a change, right? It's not what he sees here, not at home. I mean, like, obviously at home he sees that, but when he goes out, it's a different world out there. It's not so equal. And then, he's seeing all these shows, and then, and it's actually, we don't realize this, but, equality is a very, very attractive thing. So I think, like, we need to start doing that. We need to start talking about it. We need to really start, to shift the narrative.
There is another bit that you talk about, which I feel like, I mean, generally conversations of mental health have barely begun. Like, if we didn't have COVID, most of us wouldn't be talking about how women are experiencing violence, for example. During COVID, there were multiple reports which talked about it. And then, of course, the trauma of being, the caregiver, again, which is something you have also pointed out, like even more than the usual, because everybody's now home. So you have to be more.
Absolutely, yeah.
So now at least there are conversations, probably because, push came to shove and, women started talking, that, okay, this is getting too much now. I just can't do it.
Yeah.
Then there's a narrative shift, which I thought I'll mention again, is the idea of whether or not I want to be a mother figure of any kind.
Mm, mm,
Like, do
mm,
I want to mother a child? Do I want to have be mother to a pet? Like, these are
mm,
questions, which then again, and then there is, of course, trauma. I feel like these are very interlinked because,
mm.
which something that you pointed out on a personal note as well, of not being able to understand where this particular trauma comes from. So you really have, but I feel like
Yeah.
the primary thing which you were just saying is vocabulary. I feel like that
Yeah.
to also shift dramatically because most of us, including me, I feel like I had the privilege of studying a certain course, working in a certain space, coming out of my house. So I do have the vocabulary to voice a lot of things. But sometimes I
Mm,
talk to friends who never decided to come out of the city and, have continued into very conventional lives. And they are experiencing certain things, except they don't have the vocabulary
yeah.
want to talk, they want to express, they want to assert, but there is no vocabulary that's available in that sense.
Mm,
I feel like that is
mm,
also a big gap that's happening. It's not so much about mental health terms, but what I'm saying is
yeah.
there's no real vocabulary.
Yeah. 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 No, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, um, uh, I think learning to identify
Hmm.
what's happening to you, it's very important. And for that, vocabulary is important because if you can't articulate what's happening to you, of course you can't talk about it. And like even I would say 10 years back, right? We didn't know of all these terms, like setting boundaries, which is like everybody talks about nowadays. It was complete, like a non-entity for us. Setting boundaries, we say it so easily nowadays, like you must set boundaries, or whatever, I have to set boundaries. And but it was, and if you think about it, it's such a small, even insignificant term, right? It's not even like a process or a method or methodology. It is just a small term, setting boundaries. But so I think, yes, vocabulary is very, very important. And I think, when I was, I always, like, say this, that, for me, writing this book, and my first book, where it all started, has been a journey for myself as well. Because, when I'm actually, researching, I have learned, like my vocabulary has completely changed because there's so much I have learned
Hmm.
from just talking to people, different perspectives, different, like academic reports, or even just psychology journals and everything. So I think like, and my takeaway from all of that has been that yes, we have to start at a very simple level, if I can explain this, is that we have to really unpack what we are feeling. And you don't have to do it with a therapist. You can do it yourself. You could start. I think we are taught to ignore a lot of things, including like, especially our feelings.
Hmm.
Like in a given situation, how a woman feels is often suppressed, right? So I feel like that is very important, like before you get to the stage of learning the vocabulary, you need to start identifying what you need to articulate, what is wrong, like in your life, that you are looking for words to express. So I think that yes, like okay, a simple answer to your question is yes, vocabulary is important, but it is as important, to first identify and unpack what you're feeling. And then, I think the words will come. And the reason we don't have the vocabulary is because we have been discouraged so much from examining our own feelings.
Right, right. And I feel like what you just said also adds on to this whole concept that these are narratives that you hear now that, oh, women are choosing not to marry, women are choosing not to be mothers, women are choosing to get out of marriages which are abusive, which was like a whole trend, So 20 years ago, I mean,
Yeah.
left, right, anywhere, it's fairly
Yeah.
marriage, everybody stayed on. It's just, but nobody looks at it that way. That look, finally, women are saying, okay, enough is enough. and
Yeah.
moving on. But the narrative has still been that, oh, these new women, as if it's a problematic, it's such a Victorian language. Sometimes I feel, 19th century language,
Yeah. Yeah.
for some reason,
Yeah. Yeah.
choosing
Yeah.
themselves.
Mm.
And then, of course, the guilt comes. But yeah, coming back, because you've mentioned, experiences of other people as well in your book, where you're pointing out what they feel about similar
Mm.
in the conversations. So I wanted to know how important were those conversations again for your book, because it feels a lot like a community's realizations as well, and not just yours while examining,
Yeah.
yourself and your thoughts. So.
I mean, they were key, they're key. These conversations are key to the book because I firmly believe that conversations are the beginning of change. And, in my first book too, I sort of, told the story, examined the lives of women, through the lived experiences of women, my own lived experience, other women's. And in a way, this book is a continuation in the sense that I felt the need because, there was a lot of reader response to my first book that, okay, you have identified the problems, but, what are the solutions? How do we cope with this? And obviously, one book can only have so many pages. So I kept thinking about it, And then I had done this, like one page manifesto, many years back, where it was like just how not to be a superwoman. No more a superwoman, I had called it. And it just, like it was like a manifesto as to what not to do. It was literally just like a couple of pages or something. And then, I started thinking about it and I was like, but, I had already found the solutions before I wrote my first book. But it's just that, that book, needed to come first. And, there are the solutions and I just needed to elaborate on them. And I was talking about this to my editor, Chirag, and he said, that's a book. I said, but it's a manifesto. He said, no, it's a book. I said, okay. And then, when I started thinking about it, then I could see that, that whole thing about the solutions and everything. So, and then, when I wanted to give the solutions, I'm very, I don't like talking down to my, like, even as a journalist, I've never liked talking down to my readers. Like, I don't like to give them a lecture, because I'm still figuring out my life myself, I'm in no position to tell people, what to do, what not to do. But what I felt, would be more helpful for women was to learn from other women's experiences. And also because, society has created this trust deficit between women, because women together is a very powerful force. But we are unable to come together, because of this divide, that this polarization that has been created by patriarchy. So I felt like, we need more communities, I mean, I know, we have this occasional sisterhood, like groups and all of that, but I feel like we need communities, maybe, at a regional level, at a local neighborhood level, wherever you can build communities of women. And that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to bring together, women talking about their experiences, hoping that they would resonate with the experiences of other women, out there. And that you could call it a virtual community. Because again, as I said, for me, conversations, like start the process of change. So yes, those conversations are absolutely crucial, were absolutely crucial to the book.
Okay, just coming back to the last bit, because again, similar professions, which is why I would. And even as journalists, I mean, obviously, even on ground, there are so many disparities. Like sometimes I would think of as simple as if you're on your periods and there's no washroom and you're reporting like male counterparts, and there's no way to deal with that discomfort. It's not even like trying to pee somewhere.
Yeah.
But there's also, like you said, that this whole trap of, I feel like it's a trap sometimes, because this whole boss lady narrative, which may have started out as like a term for aesthetic, in terms of clothes, in terms of how one presents oneself, I feel like has become a trap now. Because it's something you also pointed out, right? Like how to be a leader is so like, because women have not been traditionally given those roles, there's so much pressure to be even better than everybody else, than men,
Yeah.
other women. And then we end up
Yeah.
being caught in a trap where we are not being ourselves at all. We are just trying to
Yeah.
copy paste the available leadership
Hmm.
qualities. So
Hmm.
I thought if you could, I think you would be a better person to tell people about that.
No, I mean, I feel like that, you're right. Women have not had access to leadership positions. So those who do, maybe 1%, I would say even now, they model their behavior on the available models, which are of, male leadership, and which is inherently very toxic because, men have controlled, all kinds of resources for so long. And every space is made for them. So if you even look at the, our workplaces, they are not gender responsive, right? They're made for men to succeed. They're not, and they are made for women to fail. It's if you take a very small example, every kind of, like team building, bonding happens after work. A woman, it's difficult for women, right? Because, they might want to go back home. Women are built differently than men. Even if they don't have children, they might have pets, or they might just want to go back home, you know? So that, so obviously, and a lot of women, model themselves on men, and they become more ruthless than men because, otherwise they know that they're going to be pushed out. And it has happened to me personally. I have pushed out of almost every newsroom I've ever worked in. Because I refuse to play by the rules, set by men. I'm not going to be a toxic leader. I am going to be, I pride myself on a high, EQ as well as IQ, and I will, like have a balanced approach. I will be, somebody, who works along with the team. I'm not going to be screaming and shouting at them. It's just not, how I work. And that has not worked out well for me. It has probably, like worked well for the teams I have led because, even now I hear from them and, I'm in touch with, a lot of them and they really, like they're fond of me. But it is professionally, it has not worked out for me. So I can imagine, why women, need to portray that larger than life, boss lady kind of a, like image. But again, if you think about it, just like the superwoman myth, this boss lady is also a myth, right? It is. The moment you are tagged a boss lady, you are alienated from other women. It's as simple as that. That's where this divide and rule begins. The moment, see, even if you surpass, all the men in your organizations, you are still not going to be one of the boys, right? And you are alienated from all the women. So, like you are in a position where you can be manipulated so well.
Right.
So I think, like all of these, like we have to really start, questioning these terms. We have to really start, demanding, like gender responsive workplaces, like that, there are different kind of leaders, there is no one leadership style. So, I mean, like, it should really, for me, a good leader is somebody, who has empathy. It's as simple as that. I mean, but like that narrative, again, we come back to narrative, that narrative also needs to shift. And, that all of these narratives will start to shift when we start calling them out. But still not calling them out because of, there are not many of us out there. Okay. Even like if you think about the latest, female labor force participation, which is like around 37%, that is taken, I think, that has, I think, taken into account even women who work in the informal sector. Right. Even then, 37 means a majority of women are still not working, I mean, that also, like that figure is also kind of, very problematic because so many women, work in the, informal sector who don't identify as working. Right. So what I'm saying is that formal, like if you talk about the formal labor force, there's there's not many of us, so we really do not have the push power. We do not have the negotiation power. So, but we still, have to start from somewhere. And I think, we have to start now.
This was honestly such a lovely conversation. I wish I didn't have to end this. And I think it feels good. Like I said, I think for me, this is also a conversation that would help me figure so many things for myself. So I feel like that also adds on to the book's general narrative, which is trying to tell women to also express themselves and say no, and also put themselves first.
Yes. And saying no is so important.
So I think this adds on to it. Thank you so much for talking to me.
Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you.